All right, today we're going to finish off chapter 3 of Call of Courage. Back once more at his own shelter, Mafatu kept looking and looking at the spear. Happiness flooded through him in warm tides. It was not so much the possession of the spear, no, it was the fact that he had touched the mare. That took courage, courage. And he had set about searching, and as he set about searching for a fire stick, he sang a song at the top of his young lungs. It was a brave song of Tario, the hero god, who rose out of the sea to slay the enemies of his people. His voice rose clear and strong across the jungle stillness. Seabirds and parakeets hushed their cries to listen to the strange, intruding sound. At last Mafatu found a fire stick to his liking, a piece of hard wood, bone dry, as large around as his forearm. Then he searched for a smaller piece of the same wood. Propping the larger piece against a rock, he squatted on his haunches before it and gripped the small sliver in both hands. He began to move it back and forth upon the hard surface. A groove commenced to form. A little pile of wood dust gathered at one extremity of the groove. Now the boy's hands were moving faster and faster. Back and forth they flew, while perspiration stood out on his forehead and his breath came in gasps. At last he was rewarded. A wisp of smoke drifted upward from the wood dust. A glow. The boy seized a few twigs and, cupping his hands with great care, blew upon the spark. A flame burst into life. He had made fire. Weary with the exertion, Mafatu settled back on his haunches and watched the leaping flame. Fire. His arms and back ached unmercifully. The wound in his leg throbbed, but the warm glow of flame comforted him. It made him think of home, of food and warmth and companionship, of faces around the evening circle, of the drone of old men's voices telling their endless tales of daring. And he was swept by a sudden wave of loneliness, a longing for the sound of his father's deep voice. He shut his lips tight and fought it back, then leaped to his feet and set about his small tasks with a great show of busyness. He would not think of those things. He would not remember, if he could help it. Now he would have cooked food, warmth when he was wet through, and the first implement with which to set about building his canoe. Tomorrow he would fell a tree by fire and start to work upon his dugout. He would make fire only by day, and then not too large a blaze, for its glow might be visible on the distant island of the eaters of men. Thus he forced his thoughts into safer channels. He did a lot of work getting that fire going with just a couple sticks. That's hard to do. He threw breadfruit into the fire. There it would stay until it was charred black and thoroughly cooked. Next, he laid half a dozen wild bananas in the coals, covering them with wet leaves, so that slowly they would steam through. While his dinner was cooking, he had yet another task to do. He set about it at once. He tore off half a dozen fronds of a low-growing coconut tree. Then he began to plait them into flat, mat-like screens. These, made into a lean-to, would be his shelter against wind and storm. Several layers of them would be watertight. If only I had my knife, Yuri, the boy groaned. How simple it would be. I must search the lagoon for a pahua shell. It grinds down to a fine cutting edge. We'll soon have a good knife. Yuri thought so too. That was evident from the motion of his tireless tail. Perhaps, Mafatu thought suddenly, I might find a knife at the sacred place of the eaters of men. Then he shook his head. No, I shall never return to that terrible Mare Tabu. But each day, he resolved, he would climb to the high plateau, his lookout to the southwest. Someday, someday the eaters of men would come back. Before long, perhaps. Mafatu was certain of it, as he was certain that the sun shone and was warm. It was inevitable, and when the black men came, he would have to leave or die. The boy looked fondly at the tamanu tree that he had marked already for his canoe. Tomorrow I shall start work on it, he promised. And what a canoe I shall build, deep and strong, but light, an outrigger as swift and powerful as a shark's tail. And when my father sees it, he will say, "Oh, my son, but they build fine canoes in that island you have come from." And then I will say, "But I built it myself, my father." And then he will say, is that possible? This fine canoe? The fire blazed brightly, and the breadfruit gave forth a tempting odor. Jets of vapor rose from the steaming bananas. Yuri snuggled down at his master's side, and Mafatu hugged the dog close. There's food for you too, my brother, he cried. And tomorrow we shall have fish. See my spear, how bravely it flashes. I will make a new shaft for it, and then I shall kill the shark and the wild pig too. Yuri, you will see. The boy pulled the breadfruit from the fire and broke it in half. Its white, flaky meat was packed with sustenance, a little like bread in taste, a trifle like potato, better than either one. The boy gave half of it to Yuri. The dog circled around, sniffing longingly as he waited for his dinner to cool. The bananas popped from their skins while their juices bubbled in the heat. Deftly, Mafatu slid them out of the fire, transferred them to a broad leaf that served as a plate. Then, unmindful of burned fingers, he fell upon the hot food. He was famished. It seemed that he had never been so hungry in his whole life. And for a time there was only the sound of his greedy munching. Never had food tasted so good. He ate and ate until his stomach could hold no more. Then a great weariness stole through his limbs. With a sigh of deep content, he sank back upon the cool sand and closed his eyes. Yuri snuggled close, warm and friendly against his side. Overhead, the plaited fronds of the palms formed a snug shelter. Someday, the boy thought drowsily, I will make my roof watertight, but not yet. The tide was running out of the lagoon with the sunset in a whispering hum of sound, like the reassuring hush of a mother to her child. Mafatu lay there under his lean-to, relaxed in every nerve. He had fire, food, and shelter. He had faced Moana, the sea god. He had dared the sacred Mare of the eaters of men to win his spear. There was a new-found confidence singing in his heart. He had found a new belief in himself. At peace with himself and his world, he slept. And now I think it's probably time for you to sleep too. Remember, Grandma loves you.